Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs presentation on state and federal privacy laws. I am Carrie Gruby-Leibarker. I'm the administrator and the consumer advocate for the department. I've been here about 20 years, and this is one of the favorite aspects of my job, to be able to do educational webinars and stuff. So thank you for joining us on this rainy day. All right, so let's dive into our material for today. We're going to talk about identity theft in general first. So identity theft is essentially somebody who is fraudulently using the identity of another person to get a good or a service. An identity thief can use your information in the same way that you can, to get new credit cards, get a phone, electricity, steal your tax refund, use your health insurance, or conceal their true identity from authorities who perform background checks. Back in 2023, we had 346 identity theft reports. That was about the same as 2022. Financial is the largest category by far. I think it's around 70% of folks who report identity theft say it was in the financial realm. Government, in the area of tax fraud, somebody filing your taxes before you do, is the second runner-up, and then medical. As far as losses go, we had folks report almost $600,000 in potential losses related to ID theft. That's the total amount of money that was stolen, but the consumer was able to get it back through some of these laws that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Actual losses was over $1 million, and that's the amount of money that they had not gotten back, whether by the time they reported to us they didn't know the steps that they could take, or if they were just unsuccessful in being able to get their money back. So an important distinction that I want to make, because we are going to talk about security breaches later on in this presentation as well, and everybody has gotten a security breach notice by now, I'm pretty sure, and just want to make that distinction that when you're getting that security breach notice in the mail, you're a security breach victim and not necessarily an identity theft victim yet. Because a security breach is that unauthorized access to an acquisition of personal identifying information. So that could be financial account information. It could be government data like driver's license information, your driver's license number. It can be your personal information like a date of birth, things like that. And that information was not encrypted or redacted. So that means whoever got access to it who shouldn't have would be able to get that information. So that's a security breach. So your information has been released to somebody who shouldn't have it and necessarily has not been used yet. And it's that crossover from when somebody starts using the information, posing as you, that you become an identity theft victim. And this is important because there's different steps to take. If you get a security breach notice, we can give you some information on how to be proactive and clues to look for to see if you do become an ID theft victim. And then if you're an ID theft victim, there's a different path to take there too, to remedy from it. But just as a quick reminder before we get into the actual laws itself, a lot of times we become victims of identity theft because we give our information over to somebody who shouldn't have it. And so I want to remind you that no matter the method, the ultimate goal of a scam is to separate you from your money or your personal information. So do not give any of your personal or financial information to someone who cold contacts you. So that's somebody who reaches out on social media or a text or a pop-up or email or telephone call. No matter the method, they're reaching out to you asking for money or asking for personal information. Cut off that contact, reach out to whoever it is they're posing as, the government agency or the business, through a number you know belongs to them by looking at your financial statement or the back of your credit card, looking it up online to make sure and verify that contact. Because more times than not, likely 99.9999% of the time, a legitimate business and a government agency are not going to call you out the blue asking for that information. All right, so let's talk about the laws that were put into place to help protect the identities of South Carolina residents. So the main one is the Financial Identity Fraud and Identity Theft Protection Act. This came about back in 2008, and it was a comprehensive result of many bills that had been introduced over the decades before that dealt separately with social security numbers or security breaches or records disposal. And so this took information on all of those and put it in one gigantic bill. The majority of it became effective December 31st of 2008, and the security breach provisions became effective July 1, 2009. It's been amended a couple of times. In 2013, definitions were adjusted and some of the security breach portions for businesses were adjusted. It also added some criminal offenses to make it easier for law enforcement to prosecute identity theft related crimes. And then in 2014, the protected consumer freeze was added as well. So essentially, the Act provides several protections for consumers in those areas of security freezes. We have credit reports on here, but that's usurped by federal law now. Security freezes really are too, but it's similar law. We're going to go over them. Records disposal, security breaches, and more. And then the Act places requirements not only on businesses, but on state agencies or public bodies as well. So let's talk about Social Security numbers and the protections related to those. So among other prohibitions, a public body or a business is not allowed to make available to the public a person's Social Security number or 6 or more digits of that number. You cannot intentionally print or embed a person's Social Security number or 6 or more digits of that number. This is going to be a recurring theme on a card required to access a product or service. You cannot require a person to transmit the SSN or 6 or more digits of that over the internet unless there is a secure connection or the number is encrypted. A public body or business is not allowed to require a person to use their social or 6 or more digits of it to access the web unless a password or PIN is also required. You can't print it on materials that are mailed to somebody unless state or federal law requires it. And of course, you can't sell, lease, trade, rent, or intentionally disclose the information to a third party without written consent unless it's for a legitimate purpose or a government required purpose, or it's authorized or otherwise specifically allowed by law. And as far as state agencies go, whenever we collect a personal or a person's Social Security number, we need to separate that number or otherwise make it to where it can easily be redacted pursuant to a FOIA request. And at a person's request, we have to give a statement of why we're collecting that Social Security number and how it's going to be used. There are some exemptions, and this is just some highlights of them. There are a million exemptions in this law. One of them is if a Social Security number is included in an application, but you still can't make it visible whenever it's going through the mail. If you're opening an account or making a payment for a product or a service that's authorized by the consumer, if the information is collected for internal verification or administrative purposes, if somebody's providing it to a governmental authority, or if somebody's acting pursuant to a court order, warrant, subpoena, or other legal process. All right, records disposal. This is one of my favorite because we get to say the word pulverize. So for records disposal, we're going to be looking at records that contain personal identifying information. That's what this law applies to. And that includes a consumer's first name or their first initial, plus their last name, plus unencrypted or an unredacted Social Security number, driver's license number, financial account number, or other numbers or information that would allow somebody to get access to that person's financial accounts if they received that information. So if a business or a public body is disposing of a record that contains personal identifying information, they are supposed to modify it by shredding it, erasing it, or by other means, making sure that that PII is unreadable or undecipherable. There's a federal law dealing with credit reports, and they say pulverize. You should pulverize the data, which I think is fun. So that could fall into the other means. This came about because there was a state agency at the time who had sold computers, and they had not wiped those computers. This was like back in 2007, 2006. And so it became very apparent to the legislature that that issue needed to be addressed. So before we surplus items or get rid of items, we have to have them wiped, have a certification that they're wiped, and then we can sell them. Same thing with businesses. They can hire a third party to wipe those machines, but they have to get a certification that says they've been done and compliant with the law. All right, I'm going to pause here momentarily and see if we have any questions. Oh, someone gave me a tip. All right, I'm not going to mess with it right now for getting the presentation since we have kind of a little bit of a workaround, but I appreciate that tip on how to fix the PowerPoint display issue that we're having, and I'm going to try that after this presentation. I appreciate that. All right, let's see if there's any other questions. All right, not seeing any, so we're going to move on to security breaches. Okay, so for security breaches, there is a responsibility for public bodies as well as for businesses to notify consumers or residents of the state, really, whenever their information has been breached. And here it says the responsibility is on the owner of the data. So everybody knows these days, third-party folks, third-party vendors are often hired by businesses or organizations to help maintain data, servers, and things of that nature. And so it's their responsibility if they are operating or maintaining that data that contains personal identifying information that belongs to somebody else, their responsibility is to notify the owner, and it's the owner's responsibility to notify the resident of South Carolina. And there are several notification methods that they can choose from. We have a written notice, an electronic notice that has some caveats associated with it, telephonic notice, which we would not recommend because you don't know if you're actually truly talking to the right person, or a substitute notice if the cost of providing notice would be $250,000 or more, or if more than 500,000 people are affected by the security breach, or if the agency has insufficient contact information, and then they can put an email notice out, put it on their website, and really it should be notify major statewide media. And most people do all these things these days. It gets in the media pretty quickly if there's a large breach, and you usually get electronic notice or paper notice in the mail as well. Here's some data for the security breach reports that we've received. I'll give a little bit of a disclaimer that this is the least amount of South Carolina residents that have been affected by breaches. Oftentimes when we get the notice, the final count is not given, and so it gets updated later, and we often don't go back and update that information as it gets added to it. So from 2012 to 2022, our office got notice of over 12 million residents being affected by more than 550 security breaches that were reported to us. And a business and a public body have to report a security breach to our office when more than 1,000 South Carolina residents are affected. They also have to notify the credit reporting agencies of this as well. The top categories, we have 6 of them, and then there's an other. 87 of these breaches were from the retail industry. 66 were from financial services providers. 48 from the hospitality industry. 47 from the healthcare industry. 36 from education providers, 13 from government, and then 80 in the other category. And then in 2022, we got a significantly lower amount of breach notices and folks affected. So there were 86 reported breaches in 2022 with 947,000 affected residents. And then comes 2023, when we received the most security breach notices that we have received since we started collecting that information. So in 2023, 3.3 million South Carolina residents were affected by a breach through 139 breaches that were reported. And just for context, we currently have 5 million South Carolina residents, and not all of them are adults. So, and this just shows that people are getting multiple security breach notices, unfortunately. You can take a look at the security breach notices that we receive. We post them on our website. If you go to consumer.sc.gov, click on ID theft and scams, and then security breach notices, it'll take you to our security breach notice page. We give a little bit of an overview of the law, as well as some educational materials, including the ID theft prevention guide that's attached to the GoToWebinar toolbar today. And then we have a warning because scammers do often follow the headlines. And so if a big breach occurs, they may leverage that and use it to reach out to folks. So we have the reminder to never give out personal information to someone unless you can verify their identity on your own. You want to contact the business or the organization directly. And that's something that we would get a lot of calls about, especially because, recall, I said that it's the owner of the data who's supposed to be letting consumers know about breaches, but oftentimes they do an agreement with the maintainer of the data because it may have been their fault or a lack of security measures on their side for why the breach occurred. So you may get a breach notice from a third-party vendor that you don't recognize because you're used to going to your doctor's office, not dealing with this third-party vendor, as an example. And so people think it's a scam, especially because a lot of these breach notices have credit report monitoring and some kind of monitoring service associated with them, where you have to hand over personal identifying information to sign up for them. So we decided to put the security breach notices that we receive on our website so that consumers can verify that what they have is accurate. So this is the most recent version that we have. It goes through December 3rd, 2024. And you can see the variety of folks. We have hospitality in there. We have healthcare in there. We have publishing, which is interesting, a couple of financial ones. So we have those in there. And sometimes people will report to us out of an abundance of caution. So even though there may not be 1,000 people affected, we may still have a security breach reported to us. So that information is there to help allay those concerns. All right, let's talk about some other protections that are available under both state law and federal law to protect your personal information. So we have the Family Privacy Protection Act in South Carolina that applies to public bodies, and that's essentially folks that get money from the state. So it includes state agencies, but it's a broader spectrum there too. So it requires public bodies to establish policies and procedures to ensure that personal information that's being collected is actually needed for them to perform their job. And then we also have to give a notice that information may be subject to release. We have this notice on our complaint forms. And then we need to take measurable or reasonable measures to prevent commercial solicitations through FOIA requests. So if somebody submits a Freedom of Information Act request to us asking for certain information, we ask them, are you trying to use this so you can commercially solicit these folks if you're asking for that information? And if so, we're not allowed to hand that out. There's also an insurance-specific privacy law and cybersecurity requirements for insurance licensees through the South Carolina Department of Insurance. It sets minimum standards for an information security program, requires notification to the Department of Insurance within 72 hours of a security breach, sets requirements for incident responses, requires and sets standards for board oversight of an information security program, and more. So it kind of fills in some of the gaps that we have in state law where we are not, the requirements aren't really a day-to-day business operation proactive kind of measure, except for the records disposal requirements. Otherwise, it's reactive to a certain degree. You're just saying you can't collect certain information. It doesn't talk about a framework for how you're supposed to protect people's information. So the Department of Insurance has that law specific to that industry. But there are some federal laws that do fill in those gaps too. But first, we're going to talk about one of the kind of provisions to assist identity theft victims under federal law, and this is under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So if you find out that you are a victim of identity theft and there is information on your credit report related to that identity theft event, the credit reporting agencies have to block that identity theft related information. But in order to do so, you need to have an identity theft report. And that consists of an identity theft affidavit that comes from the Federal Trade Commission, as well as a police report. That's your identity theft report. And then you'll write each of the credit reporting agencies and give them a copy of that report, include proof of your identity, explain which information on your report resulted from identity theft. You're going to ask them to block that information as well. And then you're going to send similar information to the business to let them know that that transaction was related to identity theft. So these are the laws I was talking about for a framework for the protection of consumers' personal identifying information. So there's a couple of rules that we have. First, we have the red flags rule under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and it requires financial institutions and creditors, which is a very broad definition. It includes courier services and folks who do taxes and credit counselors and auto dealers. It's not just your banks and your credit unions. So they're required to develop a written program that identifies and detects relevant warning signs or red flags of identity theft. And so sometimes, you may have been contacted by your bank if you went out of state or went somewhere you normally don't go and used your debit card or your credit card. They may call you, or they may decline that transaction because they think that it may be identity theft related and they want to verify that it's actually you. Or what if the credit reporting agencies reach out to them and say, hey, we got notice from the consumer that this is a result of identity theft, or there was a dispute of information. So that should be part of the red flags. Those are just a couple of examples. I think there's 23 different red flags that are out there as samples. Then we have the safeguards rule. This is under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Again, it applies very broadly to financial institutions, and they have to develop and implement safeguards to protect customer information. There's a lot of different requirements in there, board oversight, different, testing of security measures in place, and then making sure that you're, filling gaps and things like that and updating programs as needed. Recent revisions just went into effect in June, and we're actually doing a more in-depth presentation on the safeguards rule next week, next Tuesday, and we're doing a more in-depth presentation on the Identity Theft Protection Act tomorrow for our businesses. So if you want to tune into those to learn more about these laws, you certainly can. And then we have the financial privacy rule as well under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and it has certain parameters in place to protect a consumer's non-public personal information. And so it's dealing with the sharing of your information for third parties, making sure that you're getting consent, that they're telling you who they would share it with and why, things of that nature. As far as resources go, our identity theft unit is here for you if you want to make a scam report or if you're a victim of ID theft. You can either call us toll-free at 800-922-1594 to report your ID theft situation, or you can go to our website, click on identity theft, and fill out online. We have an online version of our identity theft intake form, and then they will reach out to you to go through the steps that you need to take. You can also go to our website under ID theft and go to the publications section and click on how to report ID theft, or was your information lost or stolen. That has information. It has the baseline toolkit that we utilize, that all folks should take those steps if they're a victim of ID theft, and a checklist specific to the type of ID theft you may have experienced. And this is an example of the income tax fraud checklist, and it goes through and pulls in resources from state and federal agencies to try and make sure you have a comprehensive checklist on what you need to do in an area for your notes as well. But you can certainly contact our identity theft unit, and we will be happy to walk through this with you and answer any questions that you may have. And then under the was your information lost or stolen as well, we have other brochures, the how to prevent ID theft. On the right-hand side is what's attached, and that goes over your information has been breached. Now what? There's 4 steps there for you to take. It talks about the differences between fraud alerts, security freezes, and identity theft protection services. It gives you some security freeze FAQs, including information about that protected consumer freeze that we talked about, and then some everyday habits that you can deploy to make sure that you're avoiding ID theft, and then what to do if you are a victim. And then on the left-hand side, that's kind of the steps to take for the security breach victim. So if you get that security breach notice, that flyer is kind of a quick ditty on what you can do. On the back-hand side, it has some clues that you might have switched from a security breach victim to an identity theft victim. You can order free copies of the How to Prevent ID Theft brochure, as well as our Ditch the Pitch, a guide for guarding against scams, and some other publications by going to our website. You can get up to 50 copies of those. You can also call and get hard copies of those as well. Some of our upcoming webinars, I mentioned tomorrow, we're doing one on state and federal privacy laws. This is for businesses, and so we're going to go more in depth into FFPA and its requirements, as well as the federal laws. So if you want to learn more, I encourage you to join us. And same for the federal safeguards rule. There's going to be an in-depth presentation on that next Tuesday at 2 p.m. And then we will have our last Wednesday webinar for 2025 on Wednesday, December 18th at 10:30. And that's going to be on holiday scams. And we're actually not going to have another one. I think it's January 8th will be the next Wednesday webinar after that, because we have Christmas on a Wednesday and then we have New Year's on a Wednesday as well. So don't miss us too much. We'll still be back. You can go to our website at consumer.sc.gov, scroll down to the calendar, and you can register by clicking on the links for the titles of each of these presentations and check out what we have upcoming. I think on the 8th we might do a debt collection scams or just a general debt collections presentation. That's usually popular after the holidays, as well as a presentation on laws that apply to gyms. A lot of people like to join a gym in January, so we want to make you aware of what your rights and responsibilities are under applicable laws related to gyms or physical fitness facilities. So look out for those and make sure you're registered for those, and then stay up to date with all the things that we do through social media. You can check out our videos. If you have a friend or a family member that you think could benefit from the information we went over today, just point them to our YouTube channel and they can take a look at this. If you have any questions that have popped up in the meantime, after this presentation, you can email them or call us. That's a good reminder for me to check one more time to see if we have any questions. Not seeing any today. And then to go to our website to access our services. And I'm going to go back over that number one rule. Do not give any of your personal or financial information to someone who is cold contacting you, no matter the method. Find contact info on your own and reach out to that business or that organization to verify. All right, I think that's it. I'm looking at the question box again to see if I get a number there. Still not seeing anything. So I think that's going to be it for us today. I hope y'all stay warm as the temperatures are going to drop. And we'll look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming webinars. And if you can't join us for those, we hope to see you in 2025. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.